Howdy folks, welcome to the channel Thinking Theology. I'm Don. We've got a lighthearted one today. Christopher Hitchens on the myth of Jesus. So make of that what you will. I don't get offended if somebody believes in God. I don't get offended if they don't believe in God. I don't care. It doesn't faze me. I have my own beliefs. That's generally, I think, a healthy way of going through life. I don't think I'm my brother's keeper. So I'm basically agnostic. I'm open to arguments in life. I was a philosophy major at Rutgers back in the day. I've maintained my philosophical approach to life for the most part. So I look at the way arguments are constructed and whether or not I see gaps in them, if they're convincing, and I'll just make my thoughts. So let's see what Hitchens has to say. Now, here's the thing. According to many of the things that I've studied and read, there's little doubt that Jesus existed. That's even pretty much true among many Jewish scholars, that he existed as a man, right? The issue comes about is whether or not he was the only begotten son of God, and the virgin birth, and Trinitarian dogma, the dual nature of Christ. Why did Paul promote Jesus? Promulgate Jesus? Is that that gets into it, and then you get into textual analysis and criticism. Not on the negative side of things, but interpretation and where the issues, and you get into 1 John 5:7, which is a forgery, and all these different things come into play that are important to understand when you make your choices. And then you get into evolutionary biology, and you get into physics and all the things that, in the scientific realm are discovered, and then you formulate your own basis of belief. For me, mine's malleable. I have things that make sense, but one of the things that for me is intransigent or that I don't change is that I may be wrong on anything I believe. And so if somebody comes along and makes a better argument, I'll adopt your argument. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you look like. A good argument is a good argument, plain and simple. So let's see what Hitchens has to say.
In saying that in my book I say that there's no reason at all to believe that the so-called Jesus of Nazareth ever existed, but here's what I say about Socrates. The original collision between our reasoning faculties and any form of organized faith, this is my book, though it must have occurred before in the minds of many, is probably exemplified in the trial of Socrates in 399 BC. It does not matter at all to me that we have no absolute certainty that Socrates even existed. The records of his life and his words are second-hand, almost but not quite as much as are the books of the Jewish and Christian Bible and the Hadiths of Islam.
This is true. One of my professors, Professor Henson, I remember him saying it back in the day. He was not logic. I forget what he was my professor of, but he said, he just made a comment that Jesus and Socrates had some things in common, one of which is they both had a lot to say, but neither of them published. There you go.
Philosophy, however, has no need of such demonstrations because it does not deal in revealed wisdom. Now, as it happens, we do have some very good descriptions of the life of Socrates that make his existence to me plausible, but it doesn't matter to me at all whether he was real or not. What matters is that someone advanced his method of reasoning, his testing of evidence against experience, his commitment to a certain kind of dialectical honesty, and that if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. So that's what's precious to me. And that he never said, you've got to believe in everything I say, or go to hell or heaven. And here's why you've got to agree with me, because my mother never went to bed with anybody. And that proves the truth of what I say. Or by the way, I must have looked very dead when they took me down from the cross, but I didn't die. And that proves my point. I'm willing to grant it all. I'm willing to grant the Immaculate Conception first, then the virgin birth, then the resurrection, and the Annunciation and the Assumption. I'm willing to grant all of it. It doesn't prove the truth of the proposition that you should take no thought for the morrow.
Quick point for those of you who have said that thinking theology is an oxymoron. It is not. That is exactly what Hitchens is doing here. He is thinking theology. He's not approving of it. He's refuting it. In order to refute something, you've got to be thinking it. Plain and simple. And that's just what Mr. Hitchens is doing.
The central doctrine of Jesus of Nazareth: take no thought for the morrow. No investment, no thrift, no care for your children, that you should abandon your family, not worry about construction, about investment, about anything. Just follow me. A ridiculous and immoral proposition that, as C.S. Lewis so cleverly, and I must say for him very honestly puts it, means that the man must either have been a maniac, a sick man, an evil man, or he must have believed that the world was coming immediately to an end and that he was commanded to announce this fact to the deluded Bronze Age inhabitants of Palestine. Because if he didn't believe that, and if he didn't believe he was divinely mandated, then his words would not have been inaccurate or false, they would have been wicked. That's what you have to be talking about. Now, there is, on the historicity point, there are only two reasons, I think, to suppose that there may have been the figure of some kind of deluded rabbi present at that time. The first is the fakery of the story. The fakery itself proves something. The prophecy says this man must be born in the house of David, of David's line in David's town. It means he must be born in Bethlehem. Jesus of Nazareth is well known to have been born in Nazareth. In order to get him to Bethlehem, a huge fabrication has to be undertaken. A census is proposed by Caesar Augustus. No such census ever took place. The people of the region were not required to go back to their hometown to be registered. That's never happened. Quirinius was not governor of Syria in that year, as the Gospels say. None of the story of the Nativity is true in any detail, and not one of the Gospels agrees with each other on this fabrication. But the fabrication itself suggests something. If they were simply going to make up the whole thing, and there'd never been any such person, then why not just have him born in Bethlehem right there and leave out the Nazarene business? So the very falsity of it, the very fanatical attempt to make it come right, suggests that, yes, there may have been a charismatic, deluded individual wandering around at that time. But which is most impressive to you? The fantastic fabrications, the unbelievably inane and inarticulate preachments, or the inconsistencies in the story. You could mention another thing about the resurrection. Most of the witnesses to this are women, illiterate, stupid, deluded, hysterical females, of the kind who in a Jewish court at that time would have had about as much chance of being listened to as they would in an Islamic court today. What religion that wants its fabrication to be believed is going to say, you've got to believe it, because we have some illiterate, hysterical girls who said they saw this? No, it's impressive to me. It's impressive to me that the evidence is so thin and is so hysterical and is so feeble and is so obviously, strenuously cobbled together, because it suggests that something was going on. There was some character. And I don't want to, therefore, to profane those who think that no, that there must have been something, and say, no, there was nothing. This is not a whole cloth fabrication, but it is a very human and very intelligible and very pitiable, I think, practice of fraud that may have worked on stupefied peasants in the Greater Jerusalem area, but should really have no power to influence anyone in this room, whereas the noble methods and words and systems by which Socrates reasoned will continue to illuminate our path for as long as we care about the only real gift we have, which is our independent intelligence. Now, I think that'll do for now, but if you want to ask me, yes, I've run out of time, but if you would care just to look at the chapter I've written about the discovery, the concession now, by every Israeli archaeologist, by the whole school now of Israeli archaeology, that the entire story of the Exodus, the captivity, the wandering, the conquest of Canaan, and the rest of it, is also a complete fabrication. You will see a perfect collision between the two things that do allow us to make progress as scholars and intellectuals: the weighing of evidence against interest. And that the great school of Jewish archaeology, given every motive to find the contrary, giving every motive and every chance in the Sinai and in the region to dig up and find what David Ben-Gurion, at the founding of the state, called the title deeds of Zionism. To come back empty-handed and say we admit it, this story has no basis of any kind whatever, is I submit to you, something far more noble, far more worthwhile, far more honest, far more courageous, far more moral, and far more Socratic than any of the nonsense that Dinesh just tried to pass off on you. Thanks.
Must have been Dinesh D'Souza. So, yeah, I've been to Israel, and I've been in Bethlehem or Beit Lechem and such, and this was about 12 years ago, and I loved the trip. I'd recommend anybody to go to Israel and that region. I mean, we had lunch in Syria one day, and we were in the West Bank, and that part of it was wonderful, and there were some scary moments, questionable, little shaky moments there, but there are some things like the House of David, was reportedly, had thousands of people, but later research and archaeology has shown that it was much, much smaller than reported, and the city of David itself. But that said, I mean, there's a difference. This is where I guess it doesn't bother me what people believe and why they believe it. Hitchens obviously wanted to go real deep, and he's on a purpose to show that reason itself is being assaulted by people believing in mythological figures or placing their faith in texts that contradict themselves, and the archaeological evidence comes against it, even in the Hebrew Bible, and he liked that they were honest. The Jewish or the Israeli Archaeological Society, or whatever he called it, that particular group said, look, the Exodus did not happen. At least we don't have evidence of it. So corroborating evidence in a court of law, I would say that some of the major tenets even of Christianity would be very difficult to prove, like the doctrine of the Trinity. I mean, I would love to go up against anybody in a court of law applying reasonable standards and argue against the doctrine of the Trinity, not because of any other reason than it makes no sense. I don't have an emotional attachment to it. It's just, even based on the text themselves, that makes no sense. The dual nature of Christ itself, also the way in which we use language, militates strongly against these beliefs. For example, the notion that there are three persons in one God. Like God exists in three persons, each of whom is fully God, co-equal, co-eternal, but yet there's only one God. All right, that by itself is a contradiction in numbers, in numeracy, but then you've got three persons in one being or in one nature when it comes to the Godhead, but then when it comes to Jesus, you've got two natures in one person, the nature of fully God and fully man. And so we've got what appears to be sort of, sleight of hand when it comes to certain ideas. Now, Hitchens said that he'll even grant certain things, that Jesus may have existed and so on, and but the stories don't line up in the Gospels. These were voted on at the various church councils and canonized as official church collection, and so they were. That's what got read by folks. But interesting take on what he said back then. This is where you've got to do your research. I don't know if he's right on this or not about, the women. Okay, what do you refer to them as? Like Jewish, illiterate, hysterical women. They would have no basis in a court of law back then. Not that they were invited into a court of law to prove anything or disprove anything, but that they wouldn't have had any weight. But they're the ones who are telling the story. They're the ones that went into the tomb. Some of those who went into the tomb, and they were crying because, and then they see Jesus, and then they go report it, and all this stuff. I mean, I have no problem if people believe that. I understand why people believe it. I understand how people get into believing it. I did it one time as well. But then it was actually rewriting the New Testament in my own words that I saw, and it took a year and a half to do that. And I realized some of the basic assumptions I had made were just wrong. They weren't, not only weren't they in the text, the opposite was in the text, primarily that the New Testament is the Word of God. Over 100 times it's in the text where the people said, these are my words. Paul said it a lot. These are my words. Or I'm not speaking on behalf of the Lord. I'm giving you my judgment. And after a while, I saw enough of that where it's like they're not saying they wrote dictation from God. So one, that undermined the core of the Christian faith. Many folks think it's Jesus who's the core of the Christian faith, but it's really the belief that the Bible is the Word of God. That's the core of the Judaic faith in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, and then on into the New Testament for Christians. And it preaches about Jesus, it teaches about Jesus, and that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and the light, and all this. And nobody goes to the Father but through him. But the only way people really place their super faith in those texts is to believe that it came from God, not from man. And that was undermined. And I wasn't looking to prove that. I was actually looking to prove the opposite, that the Bible was much more of the Word of God than people were making it, and that other aspects of it. And I saw the opposite, and it was painful. So I understand Christopher Hitchens. I always kind of find it funny that the first 6 letters of his first name is Christ. Maybe he doesn't like his first name either. I don't know, Christopher Hitchens. But that's just an aside. Anyway, he did a lot of research in his time. Very bright man, articulate, and he probably would even have been fun to hang out with if you like to think. I don't know. I cannot say. Some people are so wedded to their ideas and on such a mission that they suck to hang out with. But I don't know. I kind of get the sense in his free time he'd be kind of pretty. He'd be all right. I don't know. So maybe some of you folks have met him and would speak approvingly or disapprovingly of that assessment of mine. But there it is, folks. All right, leave your comments. I read them. Have a great day. See you on another video, and keep thinking theology.